We often talk about the Michigan defense as if it's a no-brainer that is going to be at least somewhere on the level that it's been, whether it's the last 3 years or the majority of the Jim Harbaugh era, because there was really only one truly bad year. 1 year where it was maybe a little iffy, and that was 2019. But I'm looking at this and I'm saying there is a strong chance that it is on last year's level. It does have that potential, that capability of being better. And that's the type of thing that we've heard from those players. Why do I think that? Let's get a little more in the nitty gritty of the defense. Let's do that here on this episode of Locked On Wolverines.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Tuesday. We're back and doing it. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I am your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. Now, I look at this defense, and the more I think about it, I'm like, why are we talking about any kind of real fall off here? Now, there is the big determining factor of the obviously personnel leaving. Mikey Sainristil, Mike Barrett, Junior Colson. Those are some of the particularly big names. Chris Jenkins obviously didn't necessarily have the impact on the field that you expected last year, but still hadn't a very strong impact, was a leader. I mean, even some reserve players like Cam Good or Josh Wallace, who was a starter, had moments. But yet I look at this group and I say, all right, there's a very strong chance that they are able to be as good, maybe even better. And for me, it all starts with the four men up front: Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Josiah Stewart, and Derek Moore. To me, those guys are the difference makers. Those guys change everything. And I started thinking about this yesterday while we were talking to Kenneth Grant, because one of the things that Michigan has up front is SEC level defensive tackles in particular. I think that Derek Moore and Josiah Stewart are probably an upgrade on the edge. And I remember talking to someone who is insidery, who said that they thought that they were better, and the only reason why they maybe didn't see quite as much production, though they played a lot. I mean, they had starter quality snaps for the most part. They played a lot. Was because just the guys that were ahead of them had more experience, more years under their belt, and all of that. But they have experience, they have capability. But when you think about what Michigan has had and hasn't had over the course of the last decade, minus really the last year, is 2 years, let's say 2 years, is truly elite guys in the middle. They did have it last year. But I think that if there is at least a stasis, if not even an improvement, I mean, watch out. Because when you start thinking about how some of these games might go, if they're able to get pressure up front, which they should, because they've got all kinds of guys. Because when you think back to like a 2016 or a 2018, sometimes, yeah, you were getting pressure in the middle. Sometimes, like a Ryan Glasgow could make a difference. I have a hard time even remembering who the defensive tackles were in 2018. Michael Dwumfor, Donovan Jeter. I know I have to be missing someone there, but I have a hard time remembering. That should tell you a little something. Whereas, like, I remember Ryan Glasgow, I remember Matt Godin. They were good, but really the stars of the show were the race cars out on the edge. Heck, in 2019, Don Brown was more playing with guys who could play outside and inside. Calling it the race car package. And while that was cute and it had its moments where it worked and everything, where like, oh, let's put Aiden Hutchinson or Mike Dana inside, I feel that was a little bit more out of necessity than it was out of the essentially luxury. So when you think about Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, what they're able to do up front, they're able to collapse that pocket from the inside. That's where I started thinking of it, because someone asked Kenneth Grant, when you're able to collapse that pocket from the inside. And I know that's something we know they're capable of. But then that just kind of got me thinking, like, when you've got his ability and his size, and we obviously know about his speed. And then you add in the fact that 33rd team, which I know that's not exactly like this big nebulous, like, oh, I got to see what their mock draft is or anything like that. But they have Mason Graham going number 1 overall in this upcoming draft. You've got those two guys in the middle. Suddenly, some of these elite passing offenses that you're going to see are not going to be able to do what they want to do in any stretch of the imagination. So I think that you're going to be able to get pressure from all sides to some degree. And with Wink Martindale liking to blitz, I just think that there's going to be a lot of moments where he's going to realize he doesn't have to. But if you start seeing double teams to both of the inside guys, that not only frees up opportunities on the edges, that does free up the opportunity for another guy, whether it be a linebacker or a safety or a corner, nickel or whatever, to suddenly make the numbers work in their favor that much more. Because to me, I don't think that teams are going to be able to just go one-on-one with Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. They're not going to be able to. And we've already seen Mason Graham, even when he was getting double teamed, sometimes he still managed to split them. He's just that much of a beast. I just look at what they have across the board. And when you look at a guy like Derek Moore, who is just starting to round into form, or a guy like Josiah Stewart, who's already had a track record of success, and then suddenly at Michigan at the tail end of the year, you're like, okay, whoa, now I see why they brought him in as a transfer from Coastal Carolina. That changes the calculus a lot of what you thought that they were probably going to be able to do and what they're going to do. Before we start talking about the middle of the defense and why I'm excited about that, I just wanted to note, like, yeah, I'm looking at last year's offense, so it's not exactly the same. Texas also, week 2, they lost their starting running back. I saw a report that they also lost their backup running back, at least for a little while. I don't know how accurate that is. I saw one report from an outlet that I hadn't heard of, but if that's true, then they're going to be one-dimensional, and that never bodes well pretty much for any team, unless you are just insanely loaded with wide receivers and have an offensive line to boot. Now, the reason why I want to look at Texas is not just because they're week 2, but because I've seen some pundits out there say they might have the best offensive line in college football this year. You know who won the Joe Moore Award last year? It was Washington. Washington was unable to run the ball. 20 carries for 46 in the national championship game, 2.3 per carry. They were not even really able to throw the ball. Michael Penix, 27 for 51, 255 yards. Yeah, he got yards, but he threw 50%. 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. Some of the catches were excellent. So there's that. Michigan only got 1 sack on the day. This doesn't really tell me the pressures and all of that stuff, but that should tell you that against an offense that is supposed to be high flying, that's supposed to have the best offensive line, everyone was talking about Dylan Johnson going into that game. Some were maybe having flashbacks of what happened the year before with TCU and the disrespect that all of us kind of paid the running backs that they had, because it's like, oh, it's a high flying passing group. And they were just absolutely masterful, the defense. And you mostly saw Mason Graham up front. And you saw a lot of the characters that you are going to see this year. The big question for me, obviously, is depth. But with the types of hype that TJ Guy has been getting for really half a year now, Etta, I'm excited to hear more about like Trey Pierce, what he's able to do. I know he's in that rotation at defensive tackle. The edge rushing is kind of where I want to see more. Who is going to be that guy outside of TJ Guy? If they can get to 5 deep in the middle, I didn't even mention Rayshon Benny. They should be at 5 deep in the middle. I would imagine if you're looking at the 2 starters, Rayshon Benny, Etta, and Trey Pierce. And then on the outside, you've got TJ Guy. So who else is going to step up? Is it Dom Nichols? Is it Cam Brandt? That's kind of the big question. As long as they're able to find some rotational pieces and keep everyone fresh, the front is going to be absolutely insane. But let's talk about the linebackers, the middle. of it all, because I think that is just as important in a lot of ways. Because I remember Steve Loren saying to me years ago, you can't win a national championship without elite linebackers. Guess what? Michigan has that. So let's talk about them here in just a moment. Before we do, I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But with the playoffs done for the other sports that aren't baseball, baseball is just going. We got fewer games. The sports aren't sportsing like I want them to, but FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. Something for everyone, every day, all season long. So head over to FanDuel.com. Start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. One of the ways that I am in particularly, the reason I'm very bullish on the linebacking core isn't just experience, it's capability. When you look at the two guys who are going to start, I think that it bodes extremely well because they are both, they weren't on the athletics freak list, but they are athletic freaks, okay? Jayshon Barham and Ernest Hausman. I feel like, in a way, Junior Colson was very good for Michigan, particularly last year. I feel like this is another one of those, waiting your turn type of things, at least for Ernest Hausman. And I think that you're going to see him take a big step forward, and you're just going to look at him and say, well, Junior Colson was very good, but this guy is just as good. I don't know if we'll be talking about him being better, but I think you're going to be like, all right, this really was the next man up. But Jayshon Barham's a guy we have talked about forever here. Because inside that building, as much as I've tried to get one of them to quote say this, I haven't been able to. They look at Jayshon Barham as like, we just got a first-round NFL draft pick through the transfer portal. And no one's talking about it. Good, right? Like, I mean, I understand other teams are going to look at the tape and say, they're going to look at Maryland tape and say, okay, we've got to contend with this guy. He hasn't had the opportunity of playing behind a line like Michigan has, nor next to a linebacker like Ernest Hausman. That's where things suddenly take a big tick up, because it went from, okay, yeah, that'll he'll be pretty good because we've seen him against Maryland. You have to keep in mind that good players that play on teams that maybe aren't so good. Keep in mind, Maryland, its defense has gotten better, but that's not what Maryland has been known for. It's been known for its offensive prowess. Jayshon Barham was essentially an island to himself with the Terrapins. That changes the calculus pretty quickly for him to be dropped in the middle of that talent with that front. Depth is a concern, but I mean, really, they only cycled through three guys last year: Colson, Barrett, and Hausman. Yeah, you saw some other faces, but for the most part, that was what you saw. So they just need another guy. It could be Jaden Hood. It could be Jimmy Rolder. It'd be even better if they can continually cycle through those guys. I am particularly excited about the freshman Cole Sullivan. He just kind of has that feeling to me. Like, if he knows the playbook, I mean, his body is ready. He's craving contact. I feel like we're going to end up seeing a lot more of Cole Sullivan than people think. But I think the question ends up being the depth. But I think that when it comes to having an elite linebacking core, I think Michigan actually has it. And they did it really through the transfer portal with, Ernest Hausman was the number one guy on the board before Travis Hunter entered, as far as what the national recruiting site said. So it wasn't like it was a surprise that he was really good. But Jayshon Barham, I feel like kind of flying under the radar, because I think Jayshon's probably better than Ernest. Both are very experienced at this point. Jayshon more so than Ernest. And then if a Jaden Hood and a Jimmy Rolder particularly step up, I mean, I feel like that's a really deep section. Now you look at safety, and the rumblings are that Quentin Johnson is in the running in the lead probably to start next to Makari Page. I think that makes all the sense in the world, given that he has been in the system for a long time. But how deep is your group if it's Makari Page, Quentin Johnson, Jaden Mangum, Wes Walker, and when Rod Moore returns, Rod Moore and Brandon Hillman? Some of those guys can be, I wonder if they're cross-training any of them to be kind of like quasi-linebackers. I mean, they all kind of do different things in run support. Safeties love to hit often. I mean, that group is just super deep. So then it comes down to the secondary. Obviously, Will Johnson and what he is capable of. And, some have him as the number 1 overall pick. I mean, he's going top 10, barring catastrophe. So it's who's opposite him. And it could be any number of guys, but Jair Hill, who we talked to yesterday, seems like he's got his head on his shoulders. I think that was a big thing last year, that he didn't have the maturity. He didn't have the head on his shoulders when it came to understanding how to conduct yourself in college football. But he also has incredible physical gifts and capability. And then you make that room deeper with Ricky Johnson and Amir Hall and the number of guys who have been contending outside of, the Cody Jones, Miles Pollards, who I would love to hear that those guys have really stepped up. Jaden McBurrows. But again, the theme is depth. We just don't know how good the depth is yet, because it's one thing when you put out, you put out guys and you're like, okay, those guys are really good. And then their backups come in at some point and they let up a big play. That's the big thing, is the consistency through the depth. I feel like Michigan has that. Then the nickel position, I think we're writing in Zeke Berry. I've heard some good things about Jaden McBurrows. And I know it's not going to replace Mikey Sainer still. But you hope that it's like a Jabril, the race car. It's fast. You got yourself a Lambo. And then when you get Khaleke Hudson in to replace him, it's not necessarily as flashy, right? But maybe it's like a Jeep Trackhawk. No, this looks dependable. Turns out it's fast. It's just as fast, maybe faster. I think that might be what you have with Zeke Berry, but I think the big question is, can he be the mistake eraser that Mikey Sainer still was? They might not need that. That's the thing. So let's continue talking about why they might not need that here in just a moment. Before we do, passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number 1 ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you are burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. I don't know if it's apparent to you why I don't normally do morning shows. I don't know when you're watching or listening to this, of course, because it's a podcast. You can watch or listen to it at any time. You can listen to it 4 in the morning. You can listen to it 4 in the afternoon. But the fun energy level, not here. The brainwaves, they're slow. But we're working towards getting the earlier shows. I prefer to have this show done earlier, I've learned. I just feel like the show's better when I do it at night. I'm way more coherent. Anyhow, Michigan doesn't necessarily need guys to be Mikey Sainer still. And one of the reasons why is because you have all of these other players that can pick up the slack, right? I think the thing that national media start to do, and even fans do from time to time, but definitely more so in the media, is that they look at players that you lose and you have a proclivity to say that guy was generational. They're not going to replace that. You might be right. But like I mentioned, going from Jabril to Khalik, it doesn't necessarily mean anything. If the person behind learns their role and can do it adeptly, if the people around them on top of that have that capability, not their same capability, but have the capability. If a rising tide lifts all ships, like I said yesterday, and it's a saying, it's not like I came up with it yesterday, but if a rising tide lifts all ships, that's kind of what you need in a lot of ways. But you think about what the 2016 defense was. To me, until really last year, that was the best Michigan had to offer in the last decade. 2016. It was incredible. And they only lost 3 games by 5 total points. They went up against high-flying offenses and they held them back. The only loss that you look at and say completely unacceptable was Iowa, because how did Iowa outscore you? And they only outscored you by 1 at the last possible second because the Michigan offense decided that it wasn't going to show up to Iowa City that day. But the defense was scary. Every time that it seemed like a team was facing third and medium, they were getting off the field, and Carl Grappentine's call was like a Saturday Night Live roll call. Like, not Sean Clifford. Who was it? Who was the guy? It was, I can't remember who the quarterback, Trace McSorley. Trace McSorley was sacked by Chris Wormley, Taco Charlton, Ryan Glasgow, Jabril Peppers. Like, that's what it was like going to a Michigan game in 2016 when the defense was on the field. It was like an absolute SNL roll call. But there were some good ones after that. And even that very next year, 2017, it was like they just lost 10 guys on that defense. They're only returning Mike McCray. How can they be better? Well, statistically, they were pretty much the same despite having a terrible offense. I mean, it wasn't exactly the same, but Michigan had the number 3 defense in the country in terms of yards per game. In terms of yards per play, it was 6th, 452 overall. 2016, it was number 1 at 261. And yards per play, it was number 2 at 421. So it was different, a little bit different. They gave up 0.3 more yards per play. They gave up about 50 more yards per game. In part, you can blame that on the offense and its inability to sustain drives in the latter part of the season. But ultimately, it was like the speed on the field was different. And I guess to hammer this home, why do I think this defense has the capability of maybe being better, like some say? Speed. Size and speed. That's what this defense has, and that's what it is. This is an SEC caliber defense. And I think that as long as the offense can be capable, and we're talking 2021, if it can be capable, they have a lot of the pieces there. If Donovan Edwards can be end of year 2022 and Kalel Mullings can do his best Hassan Haskins impression up front, the offensive line, if it performs at least as any of the last 3, which I think it has in it, and they make the right decisions as far as quarterback play calling. The receiving core has got me, the fall camp hype has got me fooled there to make me think that this is, Ohio State light. I think that if they can convert third downs, eat up some clock, I think the defense is going to be up to the task. So that's exciting. So, all right. That's going to do it for us today, but we are going to be back on Wednesday talking about what Sharon Moore had to say, unless he says something so breaking that we have to address it today. But Anyway, that's going to do it. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you again soon. Peace.